My name is Kate Kira-Pellin, and I'm Head of Creative Projects at the AKO Storytelling Institute. And on behalf of the Institute, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this evening's event, Sculpting Civic Space, the Fourth Plinth, Representation and the Value of Public Art. It's great to see familiar faces from UAL and so many guests here with us. We're really thrilled to have had the opportunity to collaborate with colleagues at the Decolonising Arts Institute, as well as the Fourth Plinth Commissioning Group and Art on the Underground to bring this evening into being. We'll shortly welcome our chair, Brenda Emmanus, who in turn will introduce each of our panellists. But first, just a bit of information and context about this event. So the format will be short presentations from each of our panel, offering some complementary insight into the topic, followed by a group discussion and an opening out to questions from the room. So do bear that in mind as you're listening to all of the talks. And afterwards, we'd love to invite you to stay on for a drink to continue the conversation. As you will have spotted, we're recording this evening. So if you would prefer not to be on video, just let one of our organisers know during the course of the evening and we'll make sure that we deal with that. And you'll be able to find the video on our website soon. We also have some visual scribes here with us, 3 students, Jing, Asha and Kaio, and they'll be documenting and telling the story of the evening from their perspective, so look out for that in future. So a quick intro to the Storytelling Institute and then on to the Decolonising Arts Institute. It's an exciting time for us as an institute. We've had a really fruitful period of exploration and experimentation with collaborators throughout the university and also beyond. And we launched officially last month and announced our new director, the brilliant Francesca Panetta. And under her leadership, we'll define what storytelling for change means for us as UAL, as a purpose-led higher education institution, and for the wider HE and cultural sectors. And our plan, our mission is to bring world-class practitioners, artists, designers, makers, performers, together with grassroots organisations and those working in the policy sector to learn from each other and maximise the positive impact in the world. Through collaboration, knowledge exchange and action research, we'll build an evidence base for what works and help to establish the discipline and practice of storytelling for change. And we'll support creative practitioners with existing tools and frameworks for transformation and develop new methodologies as well. And we believe that when the very best of creative practice enters into relationship with experts in other areas, we can create powerfully engaged cross-sector practices in order to address complex intersecting issues and challenges that face us all, from environmental crisis to social inequities. These are some of our pilot season projects, which have included collaboration with Doc Society, who've got expertise in what's known as social impact production, Culture Box, an arts and health project experimenting with research dissemination techniques, and we've collaborated with Citizens UK, bringing creativity to their campaigning work. A few more pilot season projects here for you, and before Christmas we have another event coming up, Articulating Cultural Value, Finding Common Ground, which explores different ways of establishing and demonstrating cultural value and the challenges and opportunities of finding an approach shared across different sectors. And then finally in the new year, we have a couple of events around arts and health, 2 sandpits where we'll explore what becomes possible when artists and designers work together with the health sector. And our aim is to cultivate a dynamic community of practice at UAL in dialogue and collaboration with external bodies in this area. We'll be announcing new projects and priorities in the new year, so do keep in touch with us, watch this space. And I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Maureen, who will provide an overview of the Decolonising Arts Institute's work, including the 2020 project. Thank you.
I'm Maureen Rouleau. I'm the project producer for 2020, which is one of the major projects that the Decolonising Arts Institute is currently running. I'm here to contribute to the contextual part of the evening by telling you a little bit about the Decolonising Arts Institute. So we are an institute that was conceived as a decentered, porous and evolving space for building on and developing the research and practice of previous initiatives led by UAL, including the AHRC Black Artists and Modernism project led by Professor Sonia Boyce. Professor Susan Puisanloc, Susan is right here at the front. Susan, wave, wave. Is the director, and she came in as director to develop the Institute's ethos pilot program, which took place between 2019 and now, and collaborative partnerships paving the way for two large-scale projects currently in progress, 2020, and Transforming Collections. I will tell you a little bit about Transforming Collections and tell you a little bit about the pilot projects. So pilot projects currently underway, or that have taken place between 2019 and 2022 are a number of residencies and roundtables, including Researchers in Conversation in 2020, Cultural Urgencies roundtables in 2020, Decolonising Collections in 2021, Digital Artist in Residency in 2021, and Decolonising Archives. Our pilot activities from the late 2019 onwards have been really central to developing the Institute, and we have many researchers to thank for that. The researchers who have been contributing to the pilot activities are Eliza Adami, Keirani Barocca, Alice Correa, Anjali Dalal Clayton, who contributed to Doing the Work, which is the central image that you see here, Museum Workshop Series, which was turned into a publication which is now available. She developed the project with Ilaria Puripurini from the Contemporary Art Society. We also have Harvey Diamond, Hannah C. Jones, Michelle Williams-Gamaker, Mohammad Namazi, Victoria Odiniyi, pardon me, who recently published Reimagining Conversations with Multilingual Students. A piece of research also available. Maybelle Peters, Anna Gonzalez Rueda, Eliana Selejan, Marenka Thompson Odium, Nina Trivendi. And we would also like to thank partners, UAL Archives and Special Collections, Art Fund, Arts Council Collection, British Council Collection, Manchester Art Gallery Collections, and Ineva. Transforming Collections is one of the major projects currently underway. It is a £3 million project over 3 years, funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council as part of the 5-year programme towards a national collection, otherwise known as TANC. I have colleagues here this evening who are instrumental to running the project, including Yenea at the back. If you wish to speak to someone about TANC later this evening, catch Yenea. Transforming Collections is one of the 5 TANC projects, seeking to harness the potential of new technologies to dissolve barriers between collections. These are our main partners, Tate, 11 project partners and 4 collaborating organisations. Led by Professor Susan Puisanloc as principal investigator, the Institute working closely with colleagues in the UAL Creative Computing Institute. Some of our colleagues in the Institute might be here this evening, with Tate as our main project partner. Now it's in its 2nd year, and the research team has grown from 13 to 20 contributors, with a number of practice researchers due to join in the coming year. Transforming Collections will be co-convening an international conference at the Van Abbe Museum in April 2023. Hello. And culminating in a collaborative public programme with Tate Learning in the autumn of 2024. So a lot to look forward to with TANC. Moving on to the 2nd major project in the Institute, 2020, 20 commissions and 20 collections, a 3-year programme to catalyse artists' careers and change in collections. We have An artist who is part of the first cohort of 2020 here this evening, Yuen Fong Ling, who will be speaking as part of the program. We also have partners, if I'm not mistaken. We have representatives of convened here this evening. Hello. To tell you a bit more about 2020, so our aims are to support critical reflection, change and practice and inclusive engagement between artists, public collections and the communities they serve. It is also a project that aims to combine artist residencies with artistic commissioning at scale. 2020 is bringing together 20 emerging artists and mid-career artists of colour and 20 public art collections, leading to 20 new permanent acquisitions. Each artist is undertaking a 15-month residency, leading to the acquisition of the artist's work into the host organisation's permanent collection and representation in all 20 partner collections through a print portfolio. We have recently appointed the first 8 artists of cohort 1. We have first Gail Chong Kwan, who is working with Compton Verney, Madia Karya Baskerville, who is working with the Lightbox, Yuen Fong Ling, who will be speaking to you tonight, who's working with the Sheffield Museum Services, Shanice Oretha, who's working with the Hepworth Wakefield, Aksa Arif, who's working with the Kelvin Grove Museum in Glasgow, Hannah Sabapathi, who's working with the Harris Collections and Library, Habib Hajali is working with Pallant House, and Jamila Prowse is working with Ndaka. We are very proud to have seen these artists start their residencies in September and October. Coming up, a very exciting second call for artists, which will be made public on the 6th of January. So by all means, please have a look at our website. If you are yourself an early career to mid-career artist looking for an opportunity, do apply, ask myself and my colleagues questions about the project. We are very excited to work with Birmingham Museums Trust, the Box in Plymouth, Bradford District Museums and Galleries, Bristol Museum and Art Gallery, Kettle's Yard, Leeds Art Gallery, the Herbert Art Gallery and Museum, Manchester Art Gallery, MIMA, National Museums of Northern Ireland, Walker Art Gallery and Wolverhampton Art Gallery. And in February, we will be appointing 12 artists to undertake 15-month residencies with all these collection partners. This was a flyby introduction to the Decolonising Arts Institute. And I have to say, I noticed someone coming in the back who will be contributing greatly to the evening's programme. So, Kate, if you want to take over.
Okay. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce your chair for this evening, Brenda Emmanus OBE. Brenda is a multi-award-winning broadcaster and journalist working across print, radio and TV. She's established herself as a highly respected arts, culture and entertainment correspondent, working predominantly for the BBC, reporting on the nation's arts and cultural scene. Brenda's also presented a broad range of documentaries, including Tate Switched On with Andrew Marr, following the transformation of Tate Modern, and Who Ever Heard of a Black Artist, Britain's Hidden Art History, in collaboration with UAL Professor Sonia Boyce. She's regularly co-hosted the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition Programme with Kirsty Walk, presented a documentary on the renowned artist Sir Frank Bowling, spent a year documenting Sir Steve McQueen as he developed his Year 3 project for Tate Britain, and so on. Throughout her career, she's consistently mentored young people, including students at UAL's London College of Fashion, and she's a committed diversity and inclusion champion. Brenda was awarded an OBE for services to broadcasting and diversity in 2019, and this year became an honorary doctor at UAL. Brenda, over to you.
Everyone, and thank you to my new agent. It is actually a wonderfully delightful experience to be, and I'm absolutely honoured to be hosting this evening, which I hope will be a really thought-provoking and insightful and inclusive conversation. It just feels like, I was saying when I came into this, it's almost quite intimidating walking back into an educational institution after so long. Not that I was, started when they were using abacuses for maths, but we were not certainly having these kinds of discourse and having such a collaboration and an understanding of just the value of artists and art per se. Even in the newsroom, it was always felt like sometimes a battle, because you felt like finally at the end of the program to push an art story or to tell a story that gives value or showcase an artist and the great work they're doing. So it's really exciting that we have institutions and projects that are doing just that. So I'm very excited about what we're going to come across with this evening. And it's not me, it's our wonderful contributors, which you'll soon hear from. I wanted to start the conversation with a quote, and it was just by fluke, actually. I was just flicking through something, and there was a quote which stuck with me, and it says, "The seeds of change can never grow if not planted." It's by Caroline Coles from Creative Collective. And it just seems fitting for the conversation that we're about to have as we open a discussion about art in the public realm, following the unveiling of Samson Kambalu's extraordinarily powerful Antelope for the Fourth Plinth in Trafalgar Square. Now, our esteemed panel, they'll kind of sow the seeds of provocation, which I hope you will then join in and nurture the conversation, give your thoughts and ask them questions. Decolonising civic spaces and creating public environments that are inclusive and representative of wider communities is a debate that's gained increasing momentum post-COVID. The argument is that by removal or re-representation of colonisers, we have this huge task of undoing centuries of emotional and physical damage that's been inflicted on individuals or communities, particularly from the African or Asian diaspora. So what roles do artists play? How does storytelling act as a tool? And how do we engage communities to access art while redressing the issues that we're contemplating this evening? Well, to do this, we have an esteemed array of special guests, and I'm going to introduce them individually. They'll give their presentation, and then we'll take a seat and start the conversation going. I'd like first to call on Eleanor Pinfield. Eleanor is a curator, and since 2014 has been head of art on the Underground. I haven't even had wine yet. Leading the ambitious program, bringing art to millions of people every day. At Art on the Underground, Eleanor has commissioned work from a wide range of international artists, including Heather Phillipson, Larry Achimpong, and Enjadeka, I knew I was going to get this wrong, Cornelia Crosby, excuse me. Eleanor commissioned Alejandra the Kahuna for a major permanent artwork at Battersea Power Station, which launched in 2021. She previously worked at Tate Modern, where she led the curatorial management of the Tanks 2012 Art in Action programme, delivering a changing live programme of commissions from acclaimed artists. Eleanor is a member of the Fourth Plinth Commissioning Group, and in 2021 was appointed by the Mayor of London as a Commissioner for Diversity in the public realm. We've had a little talk about the role of commissioners, which we'll expand on later on, but for now, please give a warm welcome to Eleanor Pinfield.
Hi, evening. Thank you. So, yes, I feel I'm here in some ways to represent the role of the Commissioner in this discussion and to think about what role commissioning plays when we're thinking about sculpting civic space, as it's so beautifully been put. And when I was putting this I will talk very briefly, and Kate asked us to think about storytelling in the spaces in which we work, storytelling and change. So I just want to give you some very quick examples of some projects we've done in the last year, which look at perhaps different ways of storytelling within public space. So I run a program called Art on the Underground, which is TfL's contemporary art commissioning program. The program's been around for about 20 years, and it's an amazing and very few left in the UK, truly public art commissioning program. We do many projects, of course, but these are some recent projects from the last year. And what I wanted just to draw out perhaps is my sense of storytelling within them. We commissioned Larry Achimpong in 2019 to do a work for us at Westminster Station, where he transformed every roundel, the station logo, in the station, using the colours of Pan-Africanism. All 70 of the roundels of that station. And this had a huge and very interesting effect on people travelling through the station and particularly on the staff in that station. As we were thinking about Art in the Underground's priorities in the coming years, what felt so important to us was how we might look at bringing back some stories that are overlooked, voices that are hidden from the physical structures of our public space. And in doing so, we wanted to invite Larry to make a permanent remnant of that project, which will be up in Westminster Station forever. For those of you who know the entrance, this is facing Big Ben, so it's in a very powerful and pointed location to the city. And as we unveiled it with Larry, the pride and the emotion there from bringing this simple symbol in some ways to this point in the city as a powerful counter to the other environment of Westminster has really, it's capturing those fragments of stories, like as I say, that are so often overlooked. And we've had an amazing effect from African diaspora visitors, people traveling through the station, and from staff who say, it just means so much to me to see a piece of my history represented within this organisation. For people who've contributed, obviously, it's a banal point to say, contributed so much to the city, so much to TfL, but to have these stories taken out where they belong in the public eye. That's a permanent work, but just very quickly, I suppose, in the sense of storytelling and what that means to space. We also do work on the front cover of the tube map, an ephemeral piece of paper, something that you might see as you travel around, something you hold in your hand as you're trying to navigate. And earlier this year, we worked with, actually came out last year, Joy Labinjo on this wonderful work that she had made, in fact, in preparation for the Brixton project we did with her, a larger scale commission. This sense of an intimate, personal relationship of mother and daughter doing their hair on the front of the tube map. Again, as a way to bring a sense of intimate and domestic life to the metropolitan, the infrastructure spaces of the city. Storytelling, though, can also perhaps be an unfolding story. And we've worked with Ria Store in the last year. We launched this project this summer. Ria is a young Black British artist who really focuses, does a lot of theory research, but focuses particularly on the Black body in space and what that means to be moving through spaces. And of course, TfL is a very interesting environment for thinking about the body, for thinking about flows, for thinking about surveillance, for thinking about how people are monitored. And Ria worked with a number of station staff to come up with a poetic script of a poetic kind of representation of the body through space, and work with a choreographer dancer to take these beautiful photographs that you can see across the city right now. So you can find them in Bethnal Green and Notting Hill along the side of escalators, at Stratford Station and at Heathrow here in this almost like a panopticon model in that ticket hall. It's Heathrow Terminal 4 for next time when you're out in Heathrow. The ticket hall there, completely encircling you as you come out of the tube. And as you can see there, her scripted fragments follow along, and it's as though a film is unfolding. She's a filmmaker, and of course you can see how brilliantly she's expanded that sense of film, space, experience, narrative through this project. And then there is perhaps a completely different example, I suppose, of storytelling and how we might look at it. We've been doing a series of commissions at Brixton since 2018, and that took as its starting point the murals, of which there are many, particularly focused in South London, in Lambeth area. And a lot of those murals commissioned in the 80s were commissioned after the Brixton Uprising, purposefully, by Lambeth Council in many cases, and also the GLC at that time, who did a more sort of politically minded series of murals across London, one in north, south, east, west, that was looking at directly addressing anti-racism, a series of anti-racist murals. Some of those who originally did those murals include Labena Himid and Keith Piper. And one of the people who did those murals was Shanti Panchal, who had a work in East London. And we've commissioned him this year. We just launched this last week. If you haven't been through the station yet, have a look as you're going through. And it's a single painted work, but of course, interestingly here, I suppose, with storytelling, Shanti has almost created a sort of vignette of stories next to one another, assemblages of people, of community. It's called Endurance and relates very much, this was done during the period of COVID, in that sense of community support and endurance. It also has some of the landmarks of Brixton within it. For those of you who know Brixton Windmill, there in the corner, you've got Black Cultural Archives and the Sherry Grove Memorial from Windrush Square on the right-hand side. what is so interesting to me about this series of works is that we've asked painters to really respond to the idea of collective memory, of nostalgia and of place through those means. And of course, that's a joyful thing to ask artists to do because they have such completely different perspectives on that. And where I think this is interesting in storytelling is that we've now commissioned, this is our seventh work in that site. So for millions of people using Brixton Station every day, we're forming a relationship of telling a story over time in relation to the place that is Brixton. The work's generally been up for either 6 months or a year, and before COVID, 32 million people went through Brixton Station each year. So the audiences that we're actually having a chance to engage with are just huge. So the final point I will make as I wrap up here is, here are some of the previous works that we've shown at this site. And I think that sense of an exhibition, if you like, unfolding over time, and what that means to the people using the station and the communities that feel represented when they see these works, whether that's Enjideka here on the right with a sort of domestic scene. Lisa Nissenbaum worked there with station staff and the cleaners and the tube drivers of Brixton Station on the Victoria Line. Denzel Forrester here on the right, and Joy Labinjo that just came down last week, focusing on the interior of a hair salon. And again, what we can do here by telling these stories and bringing them to an audience which otherwise are perhaps not engaging with art in the museum structure or in the gallery structure. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Eleanor. I think it's real testament to the great work that needs to be done and is being done. And I remember walking through Brixton, and you're rushing through, and then suddenly there it is smack in the face. And unless it matters to you, it resonates with you, you could quite easily rush on. But these things are genuinely really important. And I think I've actually kept Joy's bus tube thing to frame. So there lies the significance. We move on now to Maureen Salmon. Maureen is a consultant and educator in cultural leadership and professional practices for over 30 years, working in arts, cultural and educational sectors in a Pan-African context. At UAL, she's a senior lecturer and knowledge exchange practitioner. As co-chair of the UAL Africa Regional Group, Maureen was instrumental in the development of the Africa Strategy and authored the first African Symposium, Listening and Learning from Africa, earlier in June. In 2021 and 22, Maureen was awarded a UAL Knowledge Exchange Secondment to the Africa Centre and was an associate of the UAL Decolonising Arts Institute. She collaborated with the UK-based Nigerian storyteller Peter Badejo OBE to curate Emi Ijo Heart of Dance 2022, a celebration of the legacies of the Windrush generations. Maureen is a member of the London College of Communication Knowledge Exchange Committee and the UAL Research and Knowledge Exchange Ethics Committee. Wondered what all those letters were for. Give her a warm round of applause, please. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It's an honour and pleasure to be part of this panel and conversation. And I'm going to talk about UAL and higher education as a civic space and our role as, whether we're students, staff, or the community, in having agency to tell our own stories and the impact that this can have on the wider world. What I'm going to share with you is very much a personal journey and how I've been part of the UAL journey in decolonising, whether we want to say the space, the curriculum, and where we are now is not where it's always been. And I was explaining to Kate that those who've joined UAL more recently have come at a time when there's been a huge amount of work being done by many students, staff, and I do want to acknowledge them today because I would not be here had it not been for those who had gone, who have done all the work before and are still doing. So I'm going to talk about Made in Jamaica, which is my story as a Pan-African cultural leader, and then reimagine. I talked about a new humanities at UAL for 2029, And then we had COVID and everything changed, and that was pretty significant, as well as with Black Lives Matter. So we've had a new focus on the African diaspora communities globally, not just at UAL. And then I'll talk about the symposium and MHO. And there is a correlation between my journey, the MHO, and Hugh Locke's The Procession, because these are all about Pan-Africanism, decolonisation, and the changes that have happened and continue to happen. So this is a quote, you know, everybody should be in charge of telling their own stories because there's power and dignity in that. And when I joined UAL, I hadn't thought about my story being important. I came and I did the job. And then when the Decolonising the Curriculum project started, I was asked to get involved, and I was offered the opportunity as a guest curator for LCC Library, and I presented this exhibition, which was very much looking at you know, my identities and giving examples of work that I've done over the last, and yes, 30 years, and the impact these have had. And all this is rooted back in the Jamaican pledge. I was born in Jamaica and I came here at 13. And we had a pledge that was fundamentally about social justice, humanity for society, not just for Jamaica. And we used to recite the pledge every day at school. And those are really, some of the objects that I had in the collection. And I was citing examples of the work I'd done on the top row. Then the middle was the articles I contributed to, and below were my influencers. So it ranged from, you know, Grace Jones to James Berry to Duke Ellington. And the impact, this had a significant impact both as staff and students. And the poster has been, it's been reprinted many times, and each time I'm asked to talk, this comes up, and I keep being asking to talk about it. And at the same time of decolonising the curriculum, there's a student, Favour Jonathan, at CSM, and she just graduated, and this is a huge piece of art that was in the foyer at CSM. I don't know whether anyone saw that, but it had such a huge impact on me, and it resonated what I've been talking about, our values and looking at our cultural knowledge and traditions. And so I wrote this article for the Decolonising the Arts zine called Reimagine New Humanity in Leadership at UAL. And I was talking about how we need to have a leadership that's collaborative and transformative. And I do believe that, you know, we have got that. We've seen the diversity in leadership, and it's wonderful that now we've seen Dave Emba, we've got Kenyet at the head of college at LCC. And those are significant for us as staff and students to have those role models and to instill hope. As part of the Africa Strategy Group, I was asked, said earlier, to research for the Africa Symposium, and then I came across this conference in Africa, Africa and the Human, All Questions, New Imageries. And it could have been the same questions we're talking about at UAL. But there were 800 participants at this conference. It was the most powerful event that I've ever experienced. And in a way, I see it as it was a piece of art where you had some really powerful scholars and artists from the majority from the continent, but most from all over the world. And the really great thing is that they were all so young. And that came as the inspiration for the Africa Symposium, which was kind of listening and learning for reimagined Pan-African scholarly partnerships. And we brought together some key speakers. Well, so I'm going to kind of rush through. So this is the Emijo project that I brought in, and this was back in 2000, and it was a South Bank commission along the River Thames. And I wanted to bring that into evidence some of the work that's been going on. So we're going to have the video. And while the video, we're getting the video, is just to say that it's wonderful to see with visual arts, there is evidence of it, and you always have the artwork. This is a site-specific dance project, and my background is in dance. And so if it wasn't for this film that we had made, and we were worked really hard to get the budget to make it happen, we wouldn't not be able to revisit this.
The heart of dance. Emijo means the heart of dance, and is an oblique view of the Conrad's book, The Heart of Darkness, which apparently the journey in the Heart of Darkness started at Greenwich. And this production too is starting at Greenwich, but instead of going towards Africa, it's coming back in towards Britain, into London. So Emijo, meaning the heart of dance, is out of the so-called heart of darkness comes the heart of dance, which is the heart of life. So simply it means the heart of dance.
Slide very quickly, I will finish up. So we brought Emijo in 2022, and we had a workshop and a panel discussion, and I brought back all the artists who worked on this production. And this is now, we were looking for the next 75 years, which could take us to the next millennium. And then there were parallels with this, and Hugh Locke's The Procession at actually across the road. And we've got 3 minutes to see it. And that's my nephew who I took, and he was so inspired by that exhibition.
Thank you very much, Maureen. I think it's already becoming evident that the whole idea of decolonisation is a journey, and a journey that requires a lot of collaboration and in very different forms. I think the first time I saw Hugh's Armada, Sue, you can tell me, was at the Venice Biennale, and for me it was so impactful there, and it really did represent a journey that had already been taken, a journey for the Black Arts Movement, where we arrived at this space for the first time, at the Diaspora Pavilion at the in Venice. It was so powerful, and Hugh's story is so powerful, and Maureen's own personal story again says a lot. But also already I think is evident is the fact that storytelling and creating memories and decolonising, be it curriculum, be it education, comes in many different forms and very different ways of storytelling, which we're about to hear more from with Dr. Yuen Fong Ling. Now, Yuen is an artist currently based in Sheffield. He makes art using a variety of media and methods, including drawing, photography, video, and sculpture, while employing the strategies of performance and participation to engage with both professional and amateur artists, invited and public audiences. In 2022, he produced a film entitled The Empty Plinth, which documented a series of workshops, rehearsals, and public performances exploring the decolonisation of public spaces in Sheffield. The Human Memorial is his research project that is a part performance, part public engagement, part protest, prompted by the proposition of a mobile plinth and when, where it goes, and who it encounters. To enlighten us even more, please give him a warm round of applause.
So, hello, my name is Yuen Fong Ling, and I'm an artist, curator based in Sheffield, and researcher and lecturer at Sheffield University. And one of the recent recipients of the 2020 commission for the Decolonising Arts Institute at UAL. So today I'm presenting a body of work entitled The Human Memorial, which considers how our bodies, our personal and biographical selves, make memorial, tell stories, and how this might manifest in public space. research of which has resulted in the film The Empty Plinth that you are watching has developed out of a critical response to finding myself as an artist working with Sheffield City Council to help decolonise public street names and statues, and as a commissioner for Sheffield's Race Equality Commission. The artwork I developed since summer 2020 is a response to the removal of the Colston statue in Bristol, and takes a position of going beyond the realms of the civic procedures and processes that I found myself in. Often posing difficult questions and asking more questions rather than finding quick and easy solutions. So here, I simply decided to pull a mobile plinth, as you do, across the city centre of Sheffield in the hope to engage passers-by asking what they wanted in public space since the Black Lives Matter and Roads Must Fall campaigns. Supported by Safety, social art for Equality, Diversion and Inclusion project, led by Manchester Metropolitan University and the Social Art Network, the Human Memorial was developed as a series of workshops, part rehearsal, part performance, part public engagement, part protest. I didn't really know what it was, but I made it over 3 days across 2021 and 22 in venues and public sites in Sheffield relating to colonial histories. The workshops were devised in collaboration with theatre producer and performer Nathan Gearing, working with 5 other performers, including actors, circus performers and breakdancers, Marcus, Darwin, Sam, Rebecca and Samara, using the tactics of performance and participatory art practice to reenact and recreate the media footage of protesters in Bristol as a starting point. The results are captured through a 3-channel film that documents the building and constructing of performers' bodies as alternative plinth structures, while the interviews with performers discuss the dismantling and deconstruction of racial inequalities, colonial ideologies, and importantly, the personal perspectives of being artists of colour in this moment. Through a socially engaged art practice, which ironically for me can be quite isolating a process, I discovered a genuinely supportive network of creative peers, a means to share my own lived experience of racism, and experience how Britain's colonial history is impacted on migrating peoples and their lives, and ultimately their sense of self. The collaborative filmmaking process with Lumo Films, Andy Brown and Marcus Sarko has become an important storytelling part of my practice that accounts the people and places I encountered through the production of the work. The process often exposes the hidden human labour, the skill of making, and narratives behind the objects and artefacts of art in an attempt to demystify the authority, value and power artworks like public statuary and monuments have over us. In an attempt to reclaim this contested space, the research considers the personal, intimate gestures of everyday memorial making and what happens if we become the memorial and if we are the monument. The discoveries through the research, specifically by taking the mobile plinth to the streets named to commemorate the British Empire, the Battle of Majuba Hill, and General Henry Havelock, for instance, did we encounter quiet residential areas with an infrastructure of community centres, allotments, recreational spaces, corner shops and hairdressers. Ownership of these places by their residents, each telling the stories of their lives lived in the shadow of their place namesake. Their voices became activated by the mobile plinth, our intervention into these sites, and by the very presence of our bodies. A shared experience establishing an alternative social foundation by which new stories begin to emerge. More in the Q&A. Thank you.
Hi everyone, just to keep the flow going, our next guest is nearly ready, but we were just talking about, at the weekend, I went into Trafalgar Square for a project called The World Reimagined. I'm sure some of you have heard about it, where they've got 90 black artists that have recreated or given their interpretation to the globe, and it's kind of exploring and looking at the whole legacy of black history and slavery. And it was the most powerful experience I can think of for a very, very long time, because there was about 90 of these huge globes, completely different artists, all giving their own personal interpretation of what it meant to them, what black history meant to them, what storytelling meant to them, what decolonising the arts meant to them, what their art meant to them, and some of them were there talking about it. But just having this collection of the most outstanding work. And it was being, I never said, well, me and Maureen were just saying, Maureen said she'd never seen so many black people in Trafalgar Square since the release of Mandela. And it did feel like that. It felt like the most amazing bashment you've ever been to. And it was absolutely stunning. But they'd all do that. Everyone would go around the globes, and then everyone would look up at the Fourth Plinth and feel another stronger resonance towards that. So it was a really, I can only say personal, but powerful and significant moment in one weekend in London about what public space can look like, should look like, who it reflects, and who can participate in art and the experience of art in 2022. And it was the most powerful thing ever. And it was a sort of the cherry on the cake to be able to look up the Fourth Plinth and see Antelope and feel it's part of you, and someone who looked like you has created this amazing, beautiful work in such a historic space. It really was something I can't even put it into words. I'm like a kid in Hamleys at the moment, because it was pretty exceptional. And it was that particular work that has inspired this conversation this evening. So it's with great honour that I introduce Samson as our final speaker before we take to have a collective conversation on the subject. So I'm going to do a little intro on you, if you don't mind. Not that everyone doesn't know about you already. Samson lives and works in Oxford, where he is an associate professor of fine art and a lifelong fellow at Magdalen College in Oxford University. He's an artist and writer working in a variety of media, including site-specific installation, video performance, and literature. His work is autobiographical and approaches art as an arena for critical thought and sovereign activities. Samson has won research fellowships at Yale University and the Smithsonian Institution, and his work has been shown around the world, including the Dakar Biennale and the Venice Biennale. Will that do? Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Samson Kambalu.
Thank you very much for having me here. I left when I finished my PhD. It was 2016, right? But I had most enjoyable 5 years here. I was very sad when I finished my PhD. I went back to my practice. And then one time I went to give a talk at the Ruskin School of Art. And after the talk, I was approached by the head of school then. He says, "Oh, there's this professorship coming up, we should apply." So I applied, and yes, by 2017, I became a professor there. So from total unemployment in London to to be a professor. But I would say that the secret of this process is that I like to be an artist. That's my only ambition I have, is to wake up every day and be an artist. And a lot of fellows and professors at Oxford come from families of means, because in order to become a professor at Oxford, you have to spend years earning no money, or like writing papers nobody reads. And well, it was easy for me because I was happy enough to sit for years in London in cafes and read my books. No problem with that. Didn't feel guilty at all. I can stay in bed up to midday and days on end without work, and it's fine by me. But over that time, I managed to, I think, accumulate. I wrote some books, and I managed to finish the PhD, and I had shows. And yes, I think it adds up to a professor in a way. Somehow. So anyway, I am there. I picked this job more to impress my sisters, right? Because I think they think I'm just tramping around in London. So my sisters are well impressed now. Oxford Dawn. I'm not too sure. I think it's wasting a lot of time for me. Okay, so I will show you. I was invited to give a talk, and what's my take on monuments? I have to make that clear. I have had no interest in monuments, actually. My sculpture for Fourth Plinth looks like a monument, but I don't know. I didn't plan a monument. I wanted to make a work of art that looks like a monument because that's a place for it, and I would just. In other words, I would like to say that I don't mind monuments. I like the idea of monument as long as the artist is allowed to input art. Now, I believe that if a monument has art in it, it will survive time. A lot of these monuments we are asking to be taken down as simply bad art. You know, if you look at the sculpture of Cecil Rhodes in Oxford, it's vulgar. You know, this God is standing up, this guy, Cecil Rhodes, is up there, and below him is Jesus, God, Virgin Mary, the fellows, and Queens of Britain. Come on. That's lack of taste, you know. So I'm sure if he had a bit of taste, nobody would have complained, you know. Basically, where there's money, there's a little bit of crime, so we look the other way. But if you give your donation badly, then this is what you get, a protest. I can tell you that my research here was actually looking at the problematic of the gift, the problem of giving that I grew up with in Africa, that animates a lot of societies in Southern Africa. So I had a chance to learn that it's not how you give. It's not just about giving, it's about how you give. I can give you another example, is how the SACLAs are having problems. You know, when you go to every country, there's a SACLA building, there's a SACLA that. I think that's a bit of vulgarity there. So the protest maybe against the SACLA is more the way they kind of initiated their donations. So you have to think carefully how you give, because giving actually doesn't necessarily make people like you. Giving is a form of insult, right? The hand that gives you is a kind of. And anyway, but you'll be surprised at how all this is connected to what I'm going to show you. Okay. Sorry. Okay, I'll start by showing you this work, and it's a mask from Malawi. You can hear about the music. I wonder if you can guess what that is.
Cage?
Some sort, but this is as mask structures are seen in Africa. It's a more lively affair, right? You have some of these structures in the British Museum, actually. But I can quickly tell you what that is. It's actually, let's just play a bit more of it. This is in Malawi, where I'm coming from. Okay. It's this, okay? There's another mysterious scene with equally enchanting music. Okay, let's have a look at it. Yeah. Okay, so you can see parallels now, right? They are both scenes of modernity, right? And I can tell you that music in Africa sounds mysterious and exotic. It is mysterious and exotic to the Africans themselves. The whole point is that music is composed to enchant. So if it's not doing what's doing to you, it's not good in Africa either. It's as mysterious. But this is a structure of Malawian modernity. This is a depiction of a train which disguises as like a cow, bull, or some sort of. It's got two humps, which gives the game away what's moving it, but we're not going to say. And it is created by the men from the beginning of 19th century that were shipped out of African villages to work in mines in Zimbabwe and South Africa. There was a time in Africa when you couldn't find a man in a village because they had all been shipped to work in the mines in South Africa, dig up diamonds for Cecil Rhodes and the like. So when the men came back, they celebrated. They kind of marked this moment of modernization of South Africa using this train, which was foreboding because this is what would take these young men to South Africa, Zimbabwe, Southern Africa, Malawi, and so it looks exotic, but it's very much exploring a certain kind of Malawian modernity, which is at play in my work. And this is French modernity, you know. This is one of the earliest trains, films made by the Lumiere brothers, right? So my work exists between these two. This is an example of my work, a film. I think you know the relationship between technologies like the train and film. This is a film I made in London. My films are psychogeographic. I don't make them. I just make them. If I'm not in a cafe reading my book, I used to walk around London. And when I find a site that inspires my imagination, I see a ghost like this, which is myself, as another character. It's a form of masking, if you like. I stopped like here on a building site and picked some sand and put it on my hat and dusted it. And usually the films are made by strangers. If I see a moment where I'm transformed into one of these characters, I stop a stranger to film me. This is a film I made in America. It's called Mountain Man, so it's very, very brief. You have to. I'm interested in that the film can move at all. So these are elements of really air film. Again, not blind. The person who films this is a stranger. Sometimes my wife, when traveling with me. So that's a quick crash course in what I'm trying to do. My films are shown like this. This is Whitechapel, Introduction to Now Cinema. Why my films are like that, I think that I'm interested in the mechanism of, the dispositive of LA film. Because for me, in that dispositive, I can achieve the same transformation that traditionally was achieved through the traditional methods of masking. Film was always successful in Africa from day one. We have great photographers in Africa, Malik Sidibes. It's always worked. I'm not too sure about painting in Africa. It's been some dodgy painting coming out of Africa. But they're masters of photography in Africa, partly because film has always has the potential to inspire performance. And now in Africa, like in Malawi at least, there was no such a thing as art as a representation, something that I had to learn going to a Western school. For us, art was always a socialized practice, socialized practice. So, well, I studied painting, went to a Western school, but when I go to university, that's when I really got back to the art I grew up with, which is those masking. You can see the masks that I showed you, they're everywhere when you're growing up in Malawi, even as I speak. I was 3 years ago back in Malawi making a film for BBC and Netflix, and the masking is as virulent as ever. I thought we would die away. Then I begin to think that actually the last man on earth will be wearing a Nyao mask. It's why? Because masking in Africa is what we call animatic. It's a science, actually. Masking is not a metaphysics. We have many religions in Africa, but what marks masking apart is that it is a science. Ideas of God, Jesus, whatever, they are celebrated in masking, meaning even the concept of God, the masks are older than the concept of God. You know, that's how it's a science. They are developed by just watching nature. I think maybe this is a lesson of William Gordon's Lord of the Flies. These kids, they crash on an island and masks spring up. You know, and this is what's said in Africa. We say, people ask, where did masks come from? But the Malawians will tell you that where there are people, there are masks. So it's and I think you can see how the problem it is that in Europe, since the Enlightenment, you got rid of your masks, and you can see how many problems it's caused. You know, you end up projecting your own masks on other people, on immigrants and people of color, because you got rid of your masks. You have to live with your own mask. Anyway, so and this is what inspired the Fourth Plinth. After making, I was invited. I saw when I moved to Oxford, I was invited to propose for the Fourth Plinth. It's just an example of that. And this proposal for me was immediate because at the time I had on my phone this photograph, which I had found in Western Library of this Malawian hero of Pan-Africanism, John Chilembwe. What struck me in his photograph was that there was something luminous about it, but I couldn't work out what it was. And I had this photo on my phone, just thinking, what's really making this, where's the phantom of this photograph? And when I got the mayor's email to propose, I just knew that it had to be this, but I didn't know how to translate this photograph into sculpture. I knew that the four legs help, because the Fourth Plinth is for a horse, right? So I thought, okay, we've got two men here. That's the beginning of a sculpture. But how are we gonna put these men on the plinth? And so I had to research around this figure. I discovered actually that he was wearing his hat sideways. Because I was looking for this hat in London, and I couldn't find a hat that does that act. And I realized that if I did it this way, that's what's happening there. So the next question for me was, why is it drawing my attention to his hat? I dug into history again, and I discovered that actually it was forbidden for Africans to wear a hat before a white person. And this act was made by John Chilembwe, a Malawian figure of Pan-Africanism, as an act of defiance. So I thought, okay, the focus of this sculpture will be hats. But then I started adding color to the hats. It didn't work until one morning, I just saw this guy rise up to bigger. I didn't know why. I had the solution at something like 3 or 4 a.m. usually when I find solutions in the waking hour, a few 20 minutes when you've just woken up from sleep. But I discovered that actually I had made him to a size of an antelope. So in a way, you could say there's a horse there and a rider, if you like. The empire has stood up and become a human being. And this is what happens. But the construction of this whole thing is a logical film. The star is bigger and the support act is smaller. John Chilembwe was standing here with his friend, John Chole, who was supporting his cause to fight against injustices such as that, like forbidding Africans wearing hats in front of white people. I always grew up with dandies in Africa, but I didn't know the politics of the hat, actually. For me, I just liked the hat. But then it all makes sense now why men of my father's generation and before insisted on hats, you know. It's a sign of sovereignty. And it used to wind up the colonials because they used to say, we need hats against the sun. Why do you need a hat for? So that's why Africans wore hats to wind them up as an act of defiance, expressing sovereignty. Anyway, so that's what happens. The poetry of this work is up for people to interpret, but somehow it makes sense. The sculpture has internal logic. It looks classical, but in my opinion, you really have to interact with this work physically, but you also have to really think through it to really appreciate what's going on there. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Samson. Thank you, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed it so far. I think you got an insight into everybody's motivation. So I'm going to grab the group together on the table and we're going to continue the conversation. So can I invite all the panelists to sit over there, please? Right, I'm going to start with you, Samson. You've ended, so I'm going to start with you. And it's interesting because you mentioned that you didn't see the Fourth Plinth as a memorial, but as I mentioned over the weekend, everybody kind of seemed to receive it as such. It felt monumental. It felt like almost like the Shrigley stick his fingers up. It felt defiant. It felt so many things. So it felt personal, but it felt grander than that. When you were invited, you've told us roughly what inspired it, but did you think how it might be received? Did you ever consider that?
Oh yes, I think my work. I always think that my work, if you look at it, is playful and transgressive. You know, I always think that art has to speak truth to power. For me, art is not for complementing power, but for uncertain power. I mean, this is how masks are used in Africa. Masks is an opportunity for the people to reassert themselves against power structures. So masking in Africa is always at loggerheads with the chiefs. You know, that's how power is balanced into the villages. The chiefs have their own design to run a village. The masks come to destabilize that and to rearrange things, to make people think again. So that's what I plan to do, to make a sculpture that doesn't make people complacent, that destabilizes things a bit. And I think that a lot of things have happened there by simply performing the photograph. Nelson takes the vertical with his capitalist ideals, and Antelope takes the horizontal. It's a matrilineal system that I'm proposing there, and it works. I didn't expect that it would, but I've never seen a sculpture that really is put on Trafalgar Square and is able to stand up to Nelson. I think this one does, but by not rising up to him, but it looks like an angel has landed there. And it's the first time I've really seen Nelson look ordinary and the lions tame. I think it's not just my doing, it's just that I just followed. This guy, John Chilembo, obviously was aware of the Malawian heritage of masking, and I did my PhD for 5 years on Nyao masking. It's a working philosophy. It works. It specializes in sovereignty. It works. It employs. You can learn the tricks. you can. But you have to be. I always say that for me to find my way here, I have to be less than black. So that's really low.
Say that again. In order to find your way. I missed that.
There's always a way into everything, but sometimes to get into the palace, you have to really sink low. Like, you understand what I mean? So if I'm just like an African, I can't go through the door. But if I become less than an African, like an ant, then I can creep through the door like I've done at Oxford.
So sounds very Machiavellian.
No. It's a trick. It's a working, because systems fail. All systems fail. There's no system that's totally closed. All systems
penetrated somehow.
Yes.
Yeah. Nyao masking is a science of finding those places that system fail to close up. And there are those,
Is it any way related to what we define as code switching and you find yourself in a sort of working in a mainstream culture in order to fit in order to get in order to stay in, that you do have to kind of wear some form of mask? Maureen,
Yes, that's where I was starting to think about, you know, in an everyday situation as, you know, a black person, African person, particularly, and for me as a black woman that coming into UAL, I came in with a particular mask, and then I changed that mask when I did Made in Jamaica, because up until then, people didn't know, and I had a mask and people didn't know, they just, I mean, I came in and I did the job. But who are you really? This is who I am. And then that changed everything. It started being seen in a very different way. So I think that masking, we still do it. And I was reflecting also on Hugh Locke's procession, that they're all masked. And when I showed the photograph of my nephew, that's a question he asked me about it. Why are they all masked? Why are they disguised? You know, who are they really? And I think for us, we're constantly having to mask up, remask.
Yeah. It's suffocating. That's why masks are always the rock. There's that element of using the remainder, you know, the things that fall to the ground, you know, his use of this luxury, this kind of almost, and that's key. All masking use the remainder, things that like fingernails and hair that falls from your head. That's where real power is. You know, the remainder in Africa is seen almost as God, you know. Here it's about the whole, you know. Here it's about, in Africa, people don't admire, in Malawi at least, people are not amazed by the glass that hold, but what falls to the ground to make the making of this glass possible. It's what's, so for me, that's, as an artist, that's the empowering part of my practice, the remainder. It's a complicated, but a lot of masks, this is used, you can see it in carnival.
Oh, yeah.
It explains why carnivals are full of the remainder.
Even masquerade balls,
Yes.
you can go and be something very different.
Yeah, something
It's
the other,
very
different. It has this power of, yeah, so anyway, I make a sculpture that looks traditional, but there's something awkward about it, but that's its very power. Anyway, it's a long story. I think we're gonna start right by here.
The subject which we're talking about decolonising civic spaces, that's a pretty powerful platform to do so in what you did. You mentioned in something that you said you feel we're in a time of recognition. Do you think you being in that position to do so would have happened, say, 10 years ago? Do you think the time is now and things are different and people are reflecting different, even before George Floyd? Or do you think that's been
I can tell you that Antelope is what we call the cunning of reason. I think the Hegelian term of cunning, in that I don't think it's the mayor's office that's responsible for Antelope or myself. It's time. It's the cunning of time that they had no choice but put Antelope there. And I don't feel necessarily fully responsible for the work. I think I've just been used to. He couldn't be Mandela, you see. He couldn't be Tutu. He had to be John Chilembe, somebody, an African unknown, going back to this kind of remainder we are talking about, somebody who can hold that power. I think if I propose Malcolm X, it's too much. Marcus Garvey, it's too much. Kanye West, it's too much. It had to be him, and it's almost like he selects himself, and that's why I think I knew I was on to something when there was silence in the British press about him. They have nothing to say. You see, then I knew there's something. You know, the British press, it's sweet. They were silenced. So I knew that he's meant to be there because of Black Lives Matter, because of where society is at the moment. It's an inevitability. Sometimes in society, this is a moment of failure of systems, where you think you've closed everybody out, everybody's out, and you find that there's somebody inside. You know, and I feel that that's one of those moments. So it's just to say that like Bob Marley says, have no fear for atomic energy. None of them can stop the time. I'm also a big believer in that you don't have to be afraid, and the system can be undone. And I think Chilembo is a good example of how a man stands up against the might of the British Empire, and he appears there, and nobody can stop him. I think it's remarkable. For me, it fills me with hope, because there's no reason why he should be there, but it shows that it's always good to hope, you know?
In terms of hope, in terms of exploration, you look. We have this amazing story of this Pan-Africanist now, which now a broad audience now knows about, and it has a huge impact in so many ways. In terms of your exploration, the projects you've done, what have you learnt about how publics perceive the use of the decolonising of public space? Do they want to see work that kind of that plays a role like that? Do they see artists as doing that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, so, the public artwork, there's a kind of convention for it being in public space. So there's a kind of value system. There's a sort of societal sort of reason for those works to exist. And using it as a platform to kind of make a political statement is really powerful, isn't it? Interestingly, for the projects that I do, when I bring a group of artists together of colour and we walk through the city with a large lumbering object, do we get the attention of the police? So it's interesting in terms of how some types of intervention into space are given free rein, some are monitored because there is a kind of suspicion around them. And because I kind of talk about my artwork as part for performance, part protest, part public engagement, it's because we find ourselves operating in all of these spaces when we're kind of engaging with the public. They're firing questions at us, and we are kind of using our intersubjectivities to say, well, actually, it's this to you, but it's also this to you. And, that's the complexity of the work that I make, is that it's kind of engaging in lots of different conversations simultaneously.
So what does the work that you do and Samson does say about the power of art to change it? Why is that the seductive tool for engaging audiences and doing that change?
Well, for me, it goes beyond what, some of those kind of boardroom conversations can't go. So like a kind of report written about racial inequality, for instance. An artwork can go to those places where, fact-finding cannot sometimes. And, I very much use the work to kind of position in a way that it kind of draws the conversation out. It starts the conversation. It allows people entry in, and then simultaneously activating a dialogue. Because sometimes, as we've known of other types of statues, I'm not talking about new commissions now, but, we've put, say, like the Colson statue in public space to shift the historical story and narrative, to not necessarily to tell the truth, but yet we accept it for being there. So, I use an artwork to kind of, create a conversation back in a way, yeah.
Which is similar in essence to the work that you're doing, Eleanor, in terms of readdressing what we already have and have already seen. How important are the commissioners, and how important is it who commissions? I mean, who says what's valuable and what should be changed? How do you go about that work?
I think that is at the heart of a lot of these discussions, is where the power sits in public space, and that can often feel invisible. Of course, all these spaces, particularly when we think of someone like Trafalgar Square, but all the space of the city, there are forces which are maintaining a status quo and which are limiting future changes, potentially. And I think, having been involved with the Mayor's Commission, some of that is trying to unpick where that power sits, or maybe to make visible that power. But in fact, the Mayor of London doesn't have very much power in these decisions either. So you're still seeing these limitations to change, I think. And there are council groups and there are public bodies like mine or the Fourth Plinth as a sort of one of the few actual direct commissioning activities of the Mayor of London and his team. And I think getting behind, where's the money coming from, who's making the decisions, who are the people making the decisions, has always been a part of what public art is. When you look at Coastal and you look at that reassertion of narratives that were stories that wanted to be told and where the money came from, and the people behind that, there are always political agendas. And we are living through a political agenda now, which is what's making the debate so hard. I think that we have, I think you're so right, Samson, when you talk about there being a moment, and there was your work on the plinth, it was the most popular public vote. It was, when we were making that final decision. So there was a real moment. But we also know we're dealing with a moment of culture war, and we're dealing with a moment of pushback. And that is the battle that I feel very keenly that we're playing out right now. And what I would love to see somehow would be a depoliticization to some extent, to be allowed to do longer term work, rather than everything feel very transient and short term.
Is that possible?
I think it's really, really challenging, because how do you take some of the I suppose when I say take the politics out, I mean the kind of ridiculous situation we have of polarization within that, rip down a statue or leave everything exactly as it is, national trust, these mad debates that are happening in this country. I think, is there a way? I don't know, actually. I think, how do we reassert a narrative that, because I think actually if you talk to people and say our spaces are not representative of people that they serve, that is a very uncontroversial statement. That is truth, I think, and I think everyone agrees with that, but how we then action that to change is a really interesting political question for the coming decade, coming 5 years.
So do you think, do we need these memorials? Are they relevant now? Should they all come down? Should they be replaced by art? And are artists the people to be doing this? Is the role of an artist always political? Especially a black artist?
Yeah.
It has to, yeah. I think what's happening, the change is inevitable. I mean, I came to Britain when I was 24, so there are no barbarians at the gates. People have romance about going back to idyllic Britain, or the world has changed now. You can't have the old Britain. Everybody has guns now in Africa. Everybody, in those days, the explorers would come in and people had spears. So now you have to do business differently now, because the world has changed. You can't go back to the old methods as if the jet engine doesn't exist, as if the technology hasn't brought us, reduced everything. It's a challenge for Britain, but there's no hiding place. It's a challenge for Africans. It's not only Britain that has to revise its own identity. It's also everybody, everywhere. It's a problem for everybody. There's no hiding place. So I feel like the changes that are being demanded are inevitable. And for me, I'm not really afraid of the conservatives. They've had their time. The world has changed beyond, it's inevitable. Like, they can't stop time, as Bob Marley said. I agree, and it's just a matter of time. If people don't want the sculpture up, it will come down. You may delay it with long prison sentences, but if people are asking that it comes down, then it's going to come down. Usually, public sculptures stand by the will of the people. In any sculpture that's put in public because a rich benefactor imposed it, it will never stand. But maybe if you're up there because you're a politician, a bishop, a king, usually those things will stand time. But so it's inevitable when people demand change. It will happen. I'm sure that there'll be ways of recomposing London to reflect its community. I don't think this can be sustained.
The Fourth Plinth is a very specific project, isn't it? Do you think you need a Fourth Plinth in every major city?
Yeah, possibly. Yeah.
Is that? I mean, if we're it's a very future. Thinking about decolonising, it's a very future-forward concept. So, where do you think, in terms of education and the emerging young artists, what do you see as their role, and what part do they play in all of this?
The role of emerging artists, and I said that also at the start of higher education, is around change, effecting change, and to empower, artists to go out there and make those changes and put their mark on the world. They cannot go into a world that no longer exists. They're shaping their own world, and they're doing it a very different way. Public and civic spaces, that's now owned by the community. It's no longer owned by the patrons or whoever decides to sponsor a piece of art. The most powerful piece of art is those that's actually created by people, the community. And all these spaces are, they're now creative spaces. And that's why I said that in this university, we should all feel we have agency to make this a civic space for art. And it's interesting work when you see the shows, what's in the show, and also what becomes part of the university, history, become part of the university, collection. Whose work gets promoted. And, the artwork that I shown from Favourite Jonathan, it was such a powerful piece of artwork, and I think it deserved much greater recognition than it had of just being in the show. If I was, the Vice Chancellor, or, I had the power, I would have purchased that and have it as a permanent piece of work for the future. That's how powerful it was. And the people who would go in to see it.
Go on.
Yes, we do need memorials because our instinct is to remember. We need to remember. And public artworks in public space are important as well because they are sites where people naturally congregate, whether it's for protest or just making a statement publicly. We gather in those spaces. An activist, Mike Jackson, he's the guy who founded the Lesbian Gay Men Support the Miners. He said to me, all the most important rallies that I've ever spoke at was underneath a statue. Okay, so these are important spaces, not just for the artwork that are placed in public spaces, but it's the fact that we are able to gather as a society, as a group of people, in those spaces. So it's not just about the artwork, but it's about the space that is created by the artwork that is an important aspect of it as well. There's a theorist who talks about a deliberative commemorative value, and that being, so for instance, that a statue is activated by a yearly memorial activity. So for instance, the Cenotaph and Remembrance Day. This is when the statue relates to the people that it serves. And we need to gather in order to kind of make our feels selves connected in some way. So, my particular take on memorial making is all about this kind of socialization of ourselves into public space through the artwork.
Thank you. I want to go to the audience before, because I know time's going to run on us. Has anybody got a burning question? Yes, sir? What's your nearly burning question? Oh, the microphone's coming to you.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Hello? What is the plan for Antelope in terms of its future site?
Oh, good. When I proposed the sculpture, I actually suggested that it be gifted to Malawi after its stay on Trafalgar Square. But God, it cost a lot of money. This sculpture cost about £500,000. Oh, no, yes, £500,000. So there are interested parties in that. And so this particular first one, it will be hard to do that, but I'm planning editions of an additional 3. I'm hoping that one of them we can fundraise for a version to go to Malawi. Yeah, which would be, yeah, it would be great, yes. This is, Otherwise, I'm happy that it's doing its 2 years there. In fact, I would have been happy if this sculpture had done even a day.
You're so Winnie the Pooh about life, aren't you?
I was so anxious before we installed the work. I thought, because the politics of Trafalgar Square, they move fast, you know? And I thought, wow, I hope Russia doesn't do anything stupid. Or like...
Don't put ideas into his head.
And I wasn't worried about the Queen. I was already told that the Queen has a place elsewhere. But things are always changing. And for me, I just wanted a day when Chiembe appears there, even if it was just for a day. But I'm glad that he can stay for 2 years. I think it's very important. It's the thing that has happened. For me, I am actually more interested in the work as an artwork. I'm interested in how film can be translated into film, into sculpture, public sculpture. I'm interested in how a public sculpture can become a work of art. Yeah, I'm interested in kind of how you interact with the work. But by the end of the day, I'm also aware that there are a lot of people around the Commonwealth who are very proud of this moment in Southern Africa. A lot of people didn't have known what I do in the art world, but the whole country in Malawi, for instance, where I'm coming from, they're aware of this sculpture.
That gives you power to do even more.
Exactly, they're aware they're represented in this heart of the British Empire. I think that's no mean feat. I think there's something to be proud of, even if it's, I don't mind if the work doesn't stay there forever. I don't know whether I'm fast about posterity. Me, I'm more interested about the present moment.
Yeah. And I mentioned in talking to the president how the impact that having the globes had in Trafalgar Square, when they're looking up and seeing Samson's work, how emotive that was and the impact it had on the black community that came to visit, and also the tourists that were there at the time. But in the work that you're doing, is there a way of measuring the success of these artworks in these public civic spaces? Can you, should you, do you need to?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I often gets asked. I mean, we have this large audience. Can we actually, work out what people are thinking, how people are reacting? Some places you just can't avoid it. I think that's what I found so interesting, particularly with Larry Chambong's work and standing at Brixton Station, sites where those conversations seem to happen completely naturally and spontaneously and with really high levels of engagement. But I appreciate that's a really kind of qualitative bit of feedback to give. We do try and track within London, within TFL, like how many people are seeing an artwork, how many people are aware of them, which tends to come in at about 1/5 of people travelling are sort of noticing as they're going around, which, when you think about, however many 5 billion journeys a year or whatever it is, we know we're accessing this huge audience. And I think there is a history within TFL to working with artists, which people, even if they're less familiar with the city, have spoken to me about coming to the city and realising that, or collecting the maps, or finding these small fragments. So I think we all are aware, as you were saying, Yuen, that the artist's work in public space does shape how people feel within it, whether that's on a very engaged level or on a somewhat subconscious level. And it would be wonderful if TFL would let me actually put some questions in their questionnaires they put out with really detailed. Wouldn't that be great? Apparently the questions cost a lot of money per question. And for some reason, art's not always the #1 thing they want to be asking customers about, which is a shame.
And finally, question on their big questionnaires about timetables. I'm mindful of the time, and I know we want to leave time for networking. In terms of decolonising education, it took much. For it to be successful, it's not just a case of adding Black Asian authors onto a reading list. We know that. We know, and we've mentioned time and time again this evening that the journey is slow. Sometimes the impact is immediate, sometimes it's subtle. So if I could ask you all to kind of give your vision I know we need a poo here. Of what successful decolonisation of these civic spaces would look like and what it will take. And it's a big, big question, a big ask in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Do you have a vision of what success would look like?
Well, as an educator, as well as an artist, I want to be able to point to the problem. You know, say that's the investment that's been given to this object. That's why it's in this place, so that others can understand what is structurally there to support that object in public space. So from that perspective, that's what I want to be able to do with public artworks. But on another level, I'm very much interested in the way that kind of social art practice or kind of storytelling as a kind of concept is a way of creating a kind of social foundation that needs to be established about who uses those spaces, what are they for, who are the people that they serve. And I'm interested in a process where you can begin to use space and define space before something is then made as a public art in those spaces. So my decolonisation is not to kind of assume what the public want, but to actually more authentically engage with the public about what public artwork should be in space.
Thank you. Maureen?
That's very interesting, because I seldom use the word decolonisation. And particularly, you know, in relation to it, having these reading lists, because you can have umpteen reading lists but not change mindset. So for me, and with why I looked at the Emijo project with Deja Arts, is that we explored through, in a workshop situation, the panel around going back to African epistemology, looking at histories, philosophy, and using that as a kind of a new starting point, and to start thinking in that way, because there is an African way of thinking. And it's a shame Peter wasn't able to, you know, be here, because he talks a lot around the way, for example, Africa has embraced technology. And it is not a coincidence. It is to do with an African way, and particularly talks specifically about Yoruba way of thinking and being a circular thinker. So for me, I'm really interested in something that's much deeper than reading, but it's actually going really deep into the subconscious, into the depth of the emotions, and working from the inside out. And there is an element of frustration in education, because we don't have the time, or we're not kind of resourced to do that depth of thinking. What you want is kind of, you know, the results. So I say that for us in education, it's not, and I tell to students that getting the degree, as you said, was the PhD, is secondary. The most fundamental thing of being in education, it's about shifting thinking and coming up with new concepts and ideas for yourself, and using that to shape the world. And I think that's, if we're able to do that, and that's what's enabling the changes that we're seeing happening now.
It's interesting that you say that, because I know that even at the work that I was doing at the BBC, or any work I've done in terms of diversity and inclusion, forget the theories, forget the research, forget the tick boxing. When you sit people in a room and you share experiences and you share history and you share stories, that's the most impactful ever, always.
Absolutely. We can do a lot of things that needs doing just through storytelling. That's why I've braced having the Storytelling Institute. And Peter Badeja, he's a storyteller. And I wanted to come in, my journey, I tell it as a story. This is how I got to where I am. And we need to focus more on using storytelling, which we would say is that the oldest art form. And one of the
artful.
most accessible, because we all can tell, as I put with that quote, can tell, we all have stories to tell, and all our stories are important.
So Eleanor, you guys have recognised the power and influence of artists and creatives. What would it look like for you in terms of if there was the change look like?
I think looking it through a really specific public art lens, or however you want to describe it, public sphere, you know, the inequalities of society and the inequalities of the art world, which we know are really unequal and structurally racist and patriarchal, you see it played out even more strongly in public art. You know, why is that the case? And I think in a way it's because there is even less desire for change and risk in public spaces. And I see that happening again, that even as art world is grindingly, slowly shifting, the public art tends to be on a very significant lag, I fear, outside of some of these sort of highlight projects maybe, because people are scared of things that are hard. They're scared of not knowing what the answer is going to be already. When I say people, I mean sort of groups that are seeking to commission or within, there's often a sense of knowing exactly what they want and not having that openness to risk. So I think what I would be really excited to see is how that, sort of what you're talking about there as a social contract, how that could really develop in public spaces. And I think there probably are some mechanistic ways that could be supported, perhaps through supporting these groups that may be either through, really boring things like planning processes or through councils, but to really embrace this bravery, this curatorial vision, this way of telling stories which is much more complex within commissioning systems, within opportunities, to really make a fundamental change. Because I think there is a risk otherwise public art will continue to lag behind more contemporary practice more widely.
Samson, you said you've had hope, but bearing in mind we're in a cost of living crisis, bearing in mind that arts and culture is not necessarily everyone's priority that has power, are you optimistic, or do you think we're going to become increasingly risk averse, and that you really need to make the most of this opportunity that you've given now to have as much impact as possible? Do you think the time of recognition is passing?
I think that this is why it's personally, I think it's important to change paradigms. For instance, I'm always surprised that art is the first one to get a hit when we have economic. You think that that's when government should put more money in art because people are facing hard up and they want to be cheered up. Where I'm coming from, art is the infrastructure, you know? So the masking that we see is not just something in Ichewa village, like my tribe, we do on the Sunday. That's ongoing, you know? I can tell you that masking is at the heart of African economics. For instance, the masks come out to do away with exchange. You know, so when you have masks, you don't even need the market. What's hated in Africa is the notion of exchange because it leads to obligation, pettiness, resentment, alienation, all things that you have in capitalism. So what do Africans do? They try to avoid exchange. Instead, they insist on these masking festivals, which are opportunity for people to share without obligation. I can give you an example, right? Giving of a reception. If we go to an art opening, we can have drinks and go home without feeling we owe anybody anything. But if we go to a pub, we start counting. I bought the round. It's your turn. This is what moves capitalism, obligation. So in Africa, masks are actually infrastructure. That's why they have to be always on the scene, so that there's a kind of a radical generosity involved in the running of a community. So art, you can see, it's at the center. Without art, the African village fails. You know, it descends into the pettiness that you have here of exchange, obligation, profit, environmental degradation, whatever, things that you're struggling with. In fact, I really think that you have a lot to learn from Southern Africa. The communities in Southern Africa have existed on Earth longer than anywhere. So there's a place you want to go and study and to see how did Africa manage to live in equilibrium with nature for hundreds of years until the colonials came up. So I personally am interested in this notion of changing paradigms. In my sculpture, it takes a traditional look, but the character of my sculpture has different values. And Chirembo is also suggesting a horizontal view of the world. Nelson is suggesting a vertical patriarchal. Chirembo actually is suggesting a horizontal matrilineal view. And it's worth, he was very controversial to the colonials in that he was insisting on a different economy. Yes, modernity, yes, but he was not happy that Africa should move forward in this capitalist mode. He was suggesting. So I hope that's encouraged in public monuments, that diversity doesn't necessarily mean including people of color, but it also includes looking at other ways of doing things.
Diversity of thought as well.
Exactly, yeah.
I'm going to be really radical. I know we talked about free drink, and there is free drink waiting for you. So is there any burning question from the audience? If not, I'm going to ask someone from Decolonising, the project you're doing with the 20 artists. If you could sum up for us what you think the impact that you'd like that to have, or you think that's having, considering the climate that we're in. We have 20 amazing artists with great opportunities. What would you hope would come from that?
I hope it will have direct impact on artists' careers, early career artists to mid-career artists as well, who get the opportunity to work within an organisation interested in seeing change. There was a mention of change in policies and changing systems and processes. I wasn't loud enough. What we're hoping to see from this is the chance for artists to make change for themselves, and the chance for organisations to change their own structures, their own limitations, and explore ways of working with different people and working differently, with care at the centre of processes. It's all well and good to commission work and to acquire work, but there's an artist who was involved in making the work, and the care to the artist, the care to the process, the care to the art itself is quite key. But we don't always know how to put it in or how to experiment, so it becomes quite central. Susan, do you have any further thoughts towards 2020?
It's dangerous handing me a mic. No one's going to be parched by the time I hand it back. No, I think you summed it up really well, and I think it's being careful and mindful of the work, the labour, the emotion, and emotional and otherwise, that artists are often expected to carry, particularly if they're artists of colour, being invited into contested or difficult or awkward spaces and conversations. Who's carrying the conversation? How is it being carried and steered? I do want to just add something about to say thanks, first of all, for the incredible presentations and the conversation. And particularly, I'm intrigued by the dialogue between the engagement of plinths with plinths, between Samson and Yuen's work, and this kind of play of movement and bodies and limbs. We go from a kind of empty plinth to this plinth that becomes an extension of this kind of symbiotic, multi-limbed, multi-headed body rolling to these 4 legs, then 2 fingers, by the man who becomes an ant, and then a man again. But I was struck by the idea that the plinth, once it's covered up, is unmasked. It's just a rock being rolled along. But when it's uncovered, when it's a plinth, that's when it functions as a mask.
Something to think about, because I'm going to have to be really assertive now and end the conversation. On that note, I want to thank all of you for being here. Thank our panel for their amazing contributions. And your only job now is to enjoy the refreshments. Thank you very much. See you next time. Bye-bye.